Hello, welcome to another Civ 6 guides, tips, and tricks video. This time we're going to be looking at the June 2019 Civilization 6 Gathering Storm update from Firaxis. So I'm just going to give you an overview of, I'm going to go through change by change, what everything is, what's happening, what I think about it, and what you should do or expect in your games based on all the different changes. I'll just sort of go over it quickly at the end. This is probably going to be a long video. I'll try to timestamp sort of the different aspects of it and the description. So if you have a specific part you want to look at, I'll just go down to the description. So the World Congress is getting some changes. We have 3 new World Congress proposals. We have public relationships. This is pointless in multiplayer. It just basically gives more grievances, or you get less grievances. And grievances don't have any play in multiplayer. It's a single player mechanic. Espionage Pact. All spies function at +2 levels higher for the target operation, or target operation is unavailable. This is later in the game. This is probably going to be something where late game, people are going to want you. They're going to want to either make disrupting rocketry really easy, or they're going to make disrupting rocketry unavailable, depending on who's going for what. It's definitely an interesting mechanic that you'll probably see later. I would probably expect in Better Balanced Game, which is the competitive patch played on the Civ Players League, I would say that this would be made available a little bit earlier than it says. So this says later game, which is probably like modern information era. So spies, the other use for Espionage Pack would probably be making siphon funds easier. Generally, that's just what people like to do, is get extra money out of their spies. It's a pretty safe mission, so making it 2 levels higher means you're just going to be able to get a lot more money out of people. Military Advisory is definitely the most impactful of these 3 new proposals. It makes the target unit promotion class gain either 5 combat strength for option A or lose 5 combat strength for option B. Definitely, it's extremely useful for timing pushes. If you can get your main attack unit to get an additional 5 combat strength, that's a huge bonus. That's a great general's worth of combat strength. Of course, against someone, they can also take advantage of this 5 combat strength. So it's most impactful when you have some kind of unique unit that breaks away from the typical unit class. So things like the Karolian from the Swedish civilization, that's a anti-cav unit. Most people don't have a lot of use for anti-cav, but additional 5 combat strength is really nice for them and them only. So maybe if you can find ways for that to be useful. I think a lot of the time people will, in a more defensive situation, people are going to take ranged classes, getting an additional 5 combat strength. Just makes it easier to defend in all situations. And only the people that are attacking are going to want to not have that. I think losing 5 combat strength is probably more impactful if you're trying to attack someone, because you could make a defensive type of unit weaker. So something like a ranged unit or a like an anti-cav unit. And then you can attack with units that don't have that type. And you can probably make a good dent. We have new aid type. We have a military aid request. If you have 200 grievances against you, which is somewhat arbitrary, but someone declares war on you, you can get an aid request project. This is only really important because it has 2 diplomatic victory points tied to it. We're going to see that a little bit later. Some world builder stuff, some diplomatic ribbons. So just some nice UI changes. Labeling bodies of water, seeing your power lens to see where you have stuff powered. just some nice quality of life changes. And we're going to some balance changes and polish. We've got England here getting a pretty substantial buff. It's getting an additional 1 resource per turn. This is 2, but the base ability is 50% additional, so it's an additional 1 resource of both iron and coal. This is a base ability. This is also a base ability. Buildings that provide additional yields when powered receive 4 of their respective yield. This is new. This is an increase. This means that things like the research lab or the broadcast center or your factories are going to be producing even more. And then when you get a card like rationalism that increases the yields of buildings, that's going to be even more for things like research labs. So I think this is a pretty huge buff just as it is there. But then they're also tacking on an additional 20% production towards the industrial zone buildings. So those factories that are getting additional yields are now even cheaper to build. That's pretty crazy. And then in addition, just like it keeps going on, you've got harbor buildings increasing strategic resource stockpiles by 10. So in here, we've got basically an infinite storehouse for England for resources. That's kind of crazy. So that's a huge buff to England, and it didn't really need that, but whatever. Things are going to be the way they are. Canada, last best west, an additional production to tundra, snow, lumber mills, and 1 food to camps in tundra terrains. I think these might be a little bit overboard considering there are changes on the Better Balanced Game mod that also help out Canada. So Canada might have gone a little bit overboard here, just because there's 2 different things we're working with for sort of competitive Civ. Canada, that's going to be a nice buff to Canada. You definitely see a lot of camps in the tundra. You see furs, you see deer, you see truffles, so that's nice. And then lumber mills are also really strong on this patch. They're much stronger and they come much earlier. So the fact that you have access to an additional enhancer to lumber mills is great. France's chateau adjacency being doubled at flight. This is really just a tourism, a culture victory buff for France. It doesn't really affect anything else. Mostly it's just if you can get a bunch of wonders and set up chateaus around them, when you get to the part of, when you get to flight, you're basically going to get double tourism on the chateau and then double that tourism. So that's pretty important. Okay, so let's get to the big part. Diplomatic victory, World Congress. The diplomatic victory is now 25 diplomatic victory points. They were saying in the video that it was going to be 20. I'm glad they moved it to 25. I think it's important that it can't be gone so quickly. Players, whenever you get 1 diplomatic victory point now, whenever the winning option, the combo of a resolution is something you voted for. So there's an A and a B option in any resolution. If you vote for the same option, so same A, and then you also vote for the same subcategory, so say for something like trade routes to a player give 4 additional gold and the target gets a trade route. If you also vote for the same thing as what everyone else votes for and what wins, then you get a diplomatic victory point. And everyone else who voted that way does too. So that's just going to add a bunch of diplomatic victory points to the pool. Which is an interesting way. I like this at least for sort of making it a little bit more diplomatic in how you gain the points. But I think a lot of the time there are some resolutions that just sort of pass because they're the most beneficial to the most people. It doesn't really need to be talked about. Things like getting an additional wildcard slot to Merchant Republic in the mid game is something that pretty much everyone does. you can just say a lot of the time like some kind of luxury like amber, which is found all over the world, and people will most likely give that doubles. And then you can also just talk about like, oh, let's just give this guy diplomatic victory points, and that might just pass. It's not that hard to see where that could end up, giving a lot of diplomatic victory points to a lot of different players. This sort of Statue of Liberty and Mahabodhi Temple doubled their points that they give. That's just sort of in the fact that it's now 25 points to win the game. But it's a small nerf to these because they used to be a more significant factor. I think it's a little bit less, but Statue of Liberty is still a key to winning the game with diplomacy. Mahabodhi Temple, pretty important. Patala Palace is like a nice side effect. I think this is a good wonder. This gives you a free diplomatic policy card. So the fact that it gives you a diplomatic victory point is it's kind of in flavor. It's not too big of a benefit, so I like that. Aid requests now give 2 diplomatic victory points. So when you're giving gold out to people, that can be that's a pretty big part of diplomatic victory. I would say if you aren't going for diplomatic victory point, always decline these aid request things, because it definitely speeds up the process in which someone can win a diplomatic victory point by a substantial margin. And then non-emergency scored competitions are 1 diplomatic victory point. These really don't happen that much. A lot of the times, it's just the Swedish ones, so the Nobel Peace Prize awards. So you'll probably get like 1 maybe in a game with Sweden, but I would count on it. That's sort of a non-issue. It's not 1 diplomatic victory point is not a lot, except when the fact that you can get it 3 times in a Congress means it's pretty useful. The resolution is now 2 diplomatic victory points for a target player, or -3 for a target victory player. So it means you can sort of push down a little bit harder onto a player because it's -3 instead of -1. But at the same time, this resolution is going to be +3 diplomatic victory points, because the person going for diplomatic victory is always going to vote for themselves. So that +2 is going to be a +3 because of this first. So in general, I think I think it's a good change to make it cost a lot more and add a little bit more depth to it, because it was really just 1 resolution before, and then building the Statue of Liberty, and you could win the game. But now I think it at least requires you to think about what's going to be voted for, and then try and guess it. At a certain point, I think there's enough points that can be like sort of in the works for everyone that you could see a bunch of people on the verge of diplomatic victory point if the game is slow. And because the game is being slowed down a little bit and Congress is not being slowed down, I think that it might be one of the stronger victory conditions to aim for if you can grab up Statue of Liberty and Mahabodhi. And maybe grab like an aid request here and there if you're lucky. But that's more RNG dependent. So grabbing these 2 wonders is something you can ensure yourself if you want to go for that victory. Okay. So these are kind of pointless updates. This is an update telling you that it's not based on slot order now. It's based on the person who has the least remaining favor when you do tie breaking at World Congress. So it's just sort of telling you, yeah, you maybe lost a slot order once. No, that's not happening. Okay. Eras are now, there's a light scaling to the era score by game speed. This is sort of something that'll have to be looked at as sort of the weeks pass with this patch. You'll probably see, I think on online speed, it's a little bit easier to get a Golden Age now than it was before. So for civs that don't have as many unique things in an era, they might have an easier time getting it on online speed, but they might have also changed something under the hood that makes ages come quicker on online speeds, so we don't really know. These are sort of dedications for later eras, not really that important because you never really see a later era golden age in most games in multiplayer Civ. But this is just a free GDR, and this is some Eurekas and aluminum mines, so nothing really important. Dark Age policies for later eras, the only one that's of importance is cyber warfare. If you can get to cyber warfare, for some reason in a later era, it's 10 combat strength against information future era units, which is a huge bonus, and you will incinerate other information era units. So yeah, cyber warfare is pretty good. And the negative is non-existent because it's a multiplayer game and grievances are a single player mechanic. So it's actually an incredible card. Let's go into great people. Great works of writing are now 2 culture and 2 tourism. I hate this change. It makes culture victory itself a lot harder to pressure in the early game, which makes it so that people can sort of do a lot more science-based work and then go into culture, and they don't have to worry about someone's pressure a lot earlier, which I think is a little bit of an oversight. It also makes great works of writing and writers in general a lot worse. Like a great person of writing, like a writer, is 4 culture and 4 tourism in total, which is pathetic. It's basically nothing. In addition, you need slots to hold those, so it's not even just 4 culture and 4 tourism. It's 4 culture. It's 4 culture and 4 tourism if you have the space for it. So I would say that it's not that great, especially because things like amphitheaters take a huge amount of production and now basically are giving you less culture for that investment. So I don't like this. It means your culture victories are gonna be based around national parks. So civs like Canada are gonna do well. Civs that have massive bonuses in the late game tourism generation, like America, are gonna do really well. Still with culture victory, but you're gonna see like art theming, musics, and then the related cards later that boost art and music be a lot more useful, as well as things like the national parks I talked about. Rock bands, I think I'll probably need to utilize them in some capacity and get lucky as well, to be able to do a similar strength of a culture victory as you did previously before this patch. There are a lot of nice things to culture victory that the Better Balanced Game mod does. So maybe this will be changed back or changed to like 3 and 3, just to be a little bit, just to stay a little bit with the source material. But I wouldn't be surprised to see this changed back to 4 and 4, but whatever. We'll have to play it out, see how it works. If a player cannot recruit a great person of a class anymore, points are converted into faith at a 1-to-1 ratio. So this is great for civs like Russia, Khmer, Arabia, civs that get holy sites out, a lot of them, and they're like key to the to using the civ. Or you have a unique one like Russia, and you'll get a lot of great person profit points after you get your great profit. And now that's actually just turning into your faith generation. So Shrine is 1. It's getting an extra faith basically on it. And then a temple's also getting an additional faith. And then the actual holy site itself is getting an additional faith. So if you start multiplying that out by the number of cities, you're seeing like probably like a 30, in Russia's case, probably like a 40 faith increase, which is not insignificant by any margin. Um, so that's a nice buff to all those civs, but those civs that are getting it did not need that kind of help at all. I think this is actually the best, like a great way to fix this problem. It just kind of is annoying that it helps out civs that really did not need any help at all. And there's probably going to be a trend in this video, but I think Khmer's going to be on the chopping block to take some hits in the Better Balanced Game mod. Just purely because almost so many changes in this patch help them out. So I think Russia might also need to take a hit a little bit. They're also really good. Arabia probably doesn't. Arabia is not a top tier pick, but that extra faith generation is great for them. Maori also, interestingly, gets faith for having those excess rider points. So they don't usually get a lot of them, but that's kind of funny. So new map generation. So generation, so decreased 1 tile mounters on Archipelago. There's more woods in the tundra, so buff to Russia, buff to Canada, basically. Allows coal to be in woods. This is interesting. I don't understand why, but I'm all for it. Aluminum to be in rainforest. This is something like directly out of the Better Balanced Game mod, so people using that, you won't really see a difference, but that's kind of interesting they took that. I like it. Buildings are having their productions rebalanced, so they're basically being decreased generally. Most important things to take note of here are factories being about 30 production cheaper on online speed, so you can get those out a little bit quicker. Research labs, broadcast centers. These are sort of your 2 win condition type buildings. These are also 70 production cheaper. So it's a fair bit of production cheaper. You can probably get in sort of your less productive cities, you'll probably get those like 2 turns earlier than you would have before this patch. Higher production cities, maybe it's like a turn off, maybe 2 turns. Maybe 3 turns is more appropriate for your less productive cities. But yeah, it's going to make more sense when you see that the game has been slowed down significantly. So in terms of tech cost, these are buffs to yields on different buildings. So workshop, probably one of the more significant ones. 3 production from 2. You get these in every industrial zone. So an extra production, getting that online early is nice because it'll pay off a lot quicker than it would have at 2. And then industrial zones are basically doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is sort of you pay into them and then they give you out a lot more later on, which is good. Workshops it's a nice little quality of life thing. Armories, no one really builds these, but an additional production. It's nice. Factories, getting an additional regional production, as well as 6 when powered. It's pretty huge. Regional production is basically your AoE, area of effect kind of production, so you can hit multiple cities with this. Though it can't hit twice unless you have Magnus's vertical integration promotion. So, but this will be great for small increases in cities. Electronics factory goes to 8. And an important note is that with the English changes, England gets 10 production in their factories when it's powered. So, England buffs. Military academy and additional production. Same with like the armory. Food market and shopping mall. Neighborhood buildings that probably will still never be built, even though like 4 and 6 food is pretty great, and like an amenity and like 2 gold and 2 when powered, and 2 gold and 4 when powered. It makes these a little bit more reasonable to build, but I think you'll still never want to spend your production in this manner. It's much better to just save it by not picking production and then holding it in, and then maybe setting up for like a rocket or a spaceport, or for building like a wonder. Using that production is just as a wonder. Airports, not a really important building. Stadium, aquatic center, same thing. Now, tier 3 buildings also enhance sort of your specialists. So we got coal, oil, power, all those things. Give an additional citizen, production for the citizen working in there. Basically, it's just one of whatever its associated yield. It's not super impactful. You'll see maybe a little bit of extra science because research labs will increase that by 1. Then you could see people sort of like switching over to specialists, try and crank out the most science as possible. Same with sort of when you're working on your final projects in Space Race, or you're trying to get that key wonder for some other victory. Working in those sort of places will be a little bit more productive. Some little changes to the district specialist yields. Harbors now have a food instead of a science, and then they also have production instead of a culture. Or production gold instead of culture. That's what I mean. Industrial zone change is pretty huge. This is 1 production for every 2 adjacent districts. So this is the normal adjacency for every district. This is 1 for every 2 adjacent lumber mills, and 1 for every 2 adjacent mines. So it means basically a lower output that you can get from just normal worker improvements. 1 production for each strategic resource, government plaza, and quarry. So quarries get a little bit of extra love there, considering that they're not usually the best improvement to build. Usually like a stone quarry is going to get outmatched by just harvesting that stone and then building a mine on it, especially if it's on a hill. If it's not on a hill, building a quarry on like a flat stone makes it into just sort of a meh tile. So this might make you have a little bit more interest in keeping around your quarries. But it will also make gypsum, marble, that sort of stuff more valuable, because those quarries are actually fairly decent. So that's nice. Horses also do count in this strategic thing, and also if you do find later strategic resources underneath your districts, they'll count as a district and as a strategic resource. It's the same as if you also had like +1 for each adjacent mine. You had like 2 irons or something, you could get like 1.5 adjacency essentially. Get like a 3 off of 2 tiles. So it's not all bad for the industrial zone. They also do get 2 production for adjacent districts like aqueducts, canals, dams, and baths. So huge buff to civs like the Netherlands, civs like Rome, Khmer, which gets bonuses on aqueducts. Because this is sort of where you're going to get your key adjacencies, because you could set those up next to the city center, and then the industrial zone right next to both like a bath and a city center, so it's a 3 right away. And then if you get any of these incidentally, that just makes it a great industrial zone. Okay, so they've increased the value of quarries, pastures, and lumber mills because mines are sort of the dominant thing right now. So it's nice that they picked up on that. Lumber mills, I'm going to call that this is probably sort of what people are going to go towards now. Just because I think you're trading in sort of a more stable source of production instead of chopping out everything into mines. and then being sort of forced into the industrialization path. Lumber mills now provide just 2 production. They're unlocked at construction, which is way earlier than machinery, which they were at before. And there's no requirement. They don't need to be on a river. So if you can get to construction early and start setting up lumber mills on your plains hills or your grassland hills with forests, you can get like production values that you would usually find at like industrialization. And that's like with your mines. And that's pretty huge early game. People are usually craving about those kinds of yields, and you can just set up a ton of those. So I think sort of like the god spawns of the game are going to be when you get some nice luxuries and you also get lots of forest on these hills. I think you're going to want to chop jungle in a lot of cases to get your product and to get your food up, so you can work more of these tiles. You can maybe go audience chamber and get food just from governors, and then get really high production early game, and that'll sort of set up you to be able to take over the late game. They get 1 production at steel too, and steel's a really strong tech because it gets you your walls stronger, and then it's also sort of like sort of brings you into the age of tanks. And if people have to go towards industrialization, which is on the other side, they will not have walls at such a strong level. They won't have access to the tank for a very long time, and they will definitely be behind in your sort of production capabilities if you're going for a more lumber mill centric strategy. Lumber mills are also available just on any forest, so even if it's a flat forest, you can make that like a really strong tile. That's just something to look out for. It'll change a lot of how you look at the map. The fact that you can now look at rainforests and forests as places of production that you can then utilize. They're not just places to chop for instant yields in your city. Lumber mills unlock on rainforest at mercantilism. That's not super far into the game. That's probably like your mid game. You can probably head there before nationalism, and it's going to be really useful for Brazil specifically. I think when you see this, you see Brazil being really, really strong because you can preserve your really strong adjacencies. You get +1 for almost every district if it's next to a rainforest. So this is really nice for Brazil specifically. But that's also really nice. It also makes Chichen Itza amazing wonder. You can get some insane yields. I like this change a lot. Pastures, they get an additional production at replaceable parts. It's okay. Pastures are always a good improvement. Quarry gets an additional production at gunpowder. It's the change there. And I think I got one at rocketry already. Predictive systems, I think, is new, but that's future era. Might have gotten it already, but I don't think anyone's looked at their quarries when they get to predictive systems, so or know what predictive systems is. But this is mostly, I think, important for getting your gypsum quarries or your marble quarries to be a little bit stronger for your industrial zones. So maybe you'll see a few stone quarries when you know where your industrial zone is going to be set up, and it works out well, just coincidentally. But otherwise, I don't think you're going to see a lot of quarries. Hansa getting a nice little buff because it works with aqueducts, canals, and dams as a major adjacency, so you can set up even more stuff if you want to. If you want to see those crazy, like, 15 adjacency Hansas, you probably can set that up a lot easier now, so I like it. Germany buffs, always nice. I think Germany's sort of an underplayed, underpowered civ, so nice buff. Religion and Pantheons. This is sort of a lot of changes that are going to be impacting the game. They're just directly removing Goddess of the Harvest. I think this is a bad change. especially since Better Balanced Game mod has shown that like 50% value of that Pantheon is completely fair. Doesn't give you insane amounts. It doesn't snowball super hard. Just gives you relatively reasonable amounts of yields, especially since with lumber mills coming in, I think you wouldn't be chopping as many things out. So I'm curious as to why this is coming out on the same patch as lumber mills coming in. Goddess of the Fire, pretty meh Pantheon, 2 faith for every volcanic soil and geothermal. If you have situations where you have like multiple volcanoes already exploding, and they're in spots where you're already going to settle, maybe I could see a argument for Goddess of the Fire, mostly because those tiles are already super good, so you're going to want to work them. But probably a pass on this for most games. You'll probably be able to get this one whenever. Divine Spark, completely gutted. Main reason you would get Divine Spark originally is because it works so early in the game with theater squares. Theater squares have an extremely expensive building in the amphitheater to build to get an additional point per turn, and Divine Spark would give you an additional Great Writer for just having a theater square. And this worked also for like Acropolises and stuff that you could get really quickly. So you could get a lot of the books. But now books are like Great Writers and books. They're even worse. So that makes sort of the theater square part of it not as useful. Campuses, it's not as useful on, especially because campuses require a library now to take advantage of this benefit. So it's not even just getting up your campuses, it's going to take even longer. So you can't even use it as a mechanism to try and get yourself Hypatia or something like that. So Divine Spark, pretty meh. Don't take it really, unless you are really set on getting like maybe a little bit of extra faith out of your holy sites. I don't know. Maybe some civs will find a way to work with this, but I think this is gutted. Craftsman, 1 production, 1 faith from improved strategics. So in the Better Balanced Game mod, this is 2 on strategic resources for mines. So this is just 1 production, 1 faith from all strategic resources. So horses is what you're really going to be looking at here. If you have a lot of horses, and this might be something nice to get early. I do think this is decent. It's not something that's like a first pick must pick, but it's definitely like a tier 2 kind of like, I got a lot of this, so I'll take it, and it's nice. And I kind of like it a little bit more than the 2 on mined strategic resources, just because there's a little bit more variety. So even though most strategics are mines. Goddess, Earth Goddess, completely unusable now, in my opinion. 2 faith from tiles with breathtaking appeal. Before it's 1 faith from charming. Charming is 2 or 3. Breathtaking is 4 or above in appeal. 4 or above usually means that you aren't working the tiles. You just need a lot of forest, I think, and then to just not do anything with it. Or if you spawn next to like something like Mount Orema, or some other natural wonder that has a lot of tiles, you could maybe find some use for Earth Goddess. But I think the fact that it's just not as big a bonus, because Charming is a lot easier to set up and maintain, and it just sort of happens. Breathtaking has to be like actively played around, and a lot of the time you don't want tiles to be. You want to be working with like lots of improvements that decrease the appeal. So I think this is probably something you're not going to want to play with. And a lot of spawns have like maybe 2 or 3 spots that are breathtaking just on the base. Later game, it probably works out well if you can set up like national parks. But at that point, 2 faith from tiles is pointless. So Gods of the Hunt, 1 food and 1 production instead of 1 food. The mod, it's 2 food from camps, so it's kind of like a similar effect. I kind of like this effect a little bit more. I do like production more than food. Sometimes those camps would just get like over. It felt like they just had way too much food on them, so I kind of like having them spread out with one food, one production. So I kind of hope they keep that change instead of moving it back to 2 food. And I think they probably will keep it 1 food, 1 production. It's just an opinion. But simple Pantheon. Really nice on maybe like Canada, which already gets bonuses from camps. They kind of mentioned that in the video preview. Removed oral tradition, just moved it all to goddess of festivals. It's just 1 culture from each plantation. I like this better. I think both oral tradition and goddess of festivals really got sort of shafted by the fact that they had specific plantation types that they needed, and now that's just 1 culture from plantations. It's a lot easier to sort of justify taking this, because really no matter what, you're going to have some forms of plantations. Some continents have more plantation types than others, and you're not stuck by limitations. And a culture is nice. If you can get some 10 or something plantations, 10 cultures, always appreciated, especially since your great works of writing are less. So there's less ways to get culture, so any form of culture is basically buffed in significance. Religious settlements, this is the Pantheon for this patch. If you can get this one, always take it, in my opinion. This one gives you a free settler in your capital, and your border expansion is 15% faster. So we don't really care at all about this 15%. If you can get your first Pantheon early enough through something like a relic or playing a faith-based civ like Mali or Indonesia, something that gets faith from turn 1, this is huge. This is huge. You can get out settlers before your opponent can even build one. And then you can also then build a second settler. Yeah, it gives you such a tempo advantage on your opponent that I think it can be a game winner right here. Sort of in general, when you're looking at abilities, anything that comes into play in the early game and gives you some direct large benefit, the earlier it comes into play, the stronger it is. If you're getting 1 production, for say from like things like quarries up here at predictive systems, this does nothing. This could be like plus 100, and I wouldn't care at all. But getting a free settler as early as something like maybe like turn 4 or 5, that's huge. Definitely thinking there's probably going to be some changes to religious settlements. There may be a ban on it. I don't know. I think this is crazy. Definitely in the hands of a skilled player, I think this is the best Pantheon. You can take whatever else you want out of this. It's okay. Fertility rights. This one, they added a builder onto it. In the mod, it's actually a different ability than city growth, 10% higher. It gives you a food on wheat, rice, cattle, and sheep. I think they probably will just add the builder onto that existing ability, because that ability is not game breaking. It's kind of just sort of doing the city growth thing. If you know how this works, this actually doesn't really do anything. It's so minuscule, you probably will never feel it. And the sort of just additional food on those food bonus resources are much more noticeable. The extra builder is nice. If you can get that early, that's also a nice little boost to your civilization if you need the builder. In spots where you're not going to be able to use a builder immediately, it's not as good. Especially since there are so many other things that are probably better for you. River Odyssey, this is the Khmer Pantheon. 2 amenities and 2 housing to cities that have a holy site district adjacent to a river. Again, you could probably put this on anyone who has holy sites in all their cities, but Khmer specifically gets bonuses for putting holy sites on rivers. and that has been buffed in the Better Balanced Game mod. So I probably will guess there's like some sort of revert. But it's 2 amenities and 2 housing is huge. That's a lot of late game potential in an early game Pantheon. You can get a lot of cities up to ecstatic, and that in turn will make your yield stronger, both all your food, your production, your culture, your science, everything. So I think specifically for like religious civs that are going to get holy sites everywhere, I think this is great. And like a tier 1 in specific situations, for it's just a specific civ Pantheon. And I think it shouldn't be underestimated. Even in the face of things like Sacred Path, which can give you a lot of faith adjacency for holy sites for some of those civs. I think some of them would be very much willing to give that up for the 2 amenities and 2 housing, but I think that's player to player basis. Initiation rights, pretty much no change because no one's going to take that, but it gives you 50 faith for clearing outpost, and then it heals you completely. So whatever. By the time you don't get enough faith out of this to ever really justify this. So, okay, technologies and civics are rebalanced to Antinavario, so it has a maximum of 30% culture. I think this pretty much, I don't understand this at all, but why they had to do this change, but whatever. Doesn't really, I think in most cases it never really hits this anyway, so interesting why they would make that change. Stirrups requiring apprenticeship. Knights are pretty much dead, I think, in terms of being able to rush them completely. You need to set up a lot more infrastructure now. Now that it requires apprenticeship, you might as well just go for campuses and then get a tech lead and then hit with knights or some other medieval unit if that's what your plan is. Chemistry requiring replaceable parts. This just slows the game down a little bit. Means you can't go straight for research labs and then just get a crazy science lead on someone as early as it would be originally. You need to go towards replaceable parts. But personally, I think this is not really needed because going straight chemistry means you're really vulnerable to being attacked. So it's definitely a cost there anyway. Tech cost increases across the board. Generally just a slower paced game. They're around 100 or something, so that means it's probably going to be like 50 or so on online speed. Civics get same sort of treatment, a little bit less. It's probably around like 60-40 until you get to later when it's around like more like 100 on standard. So just take half of that. You're good. Unit changes, anti-air, strength is changed. Yeah, this basically just makes anti-air really strong, and you're going to be hard-pressed to break them. Especially on naval units, they just sort of upped the power of the battleship. So navies will hard counter air. That's basically what they're trying to tell you right here. Strategic resource changes to cuirassiers and cavalry. This is the key thing to look at in this spot. Niter to iron and niter to horses. So cavalry will be able to be a lot more. There are already horses in the Better Balanced game, but cuirassiers being iron means that they'll also be able to be spammed out. And they're stronger than cavalry, so it kind of just like makes cavalry a moot point unless you have Cossacks or Hussars. So yeah, cuirassiers, the sort of golden unit of that era. Reduced some upfront costs of units that are unique. This is something that was kind of reverted in Better Balanced game because it made it so that some units could just, there's way too many of them on the field at a time. But I don't know, maybe they'll keep this one. Who knows? Kind of pointless change to military academy gold purchases. If you're purchasing armies or corps, you can get a 25% discount with a military academy, so it requires a building that's extremely niche, costs a lot of production. and requires you to have enough gold to purchase an army or a corps. So, whatever. Movement range on some late game units, 2 to 3. We've got Modern IT, Mobile SAM, the most useful of this because it's anti-air. Rocket Artillery. Rocket Artillery just comes too late to make a meaningful impact in the game, but it is a good unit, in my opinion. Military Engineers, whatever. Battering rams and siege units only work with melee and anti-cav. So this means that like the only real push you can use is something to break down walls would be swords with a ram, or to use muskets with a ram. Because, I mean, I think it makes somewhat of a sense, but I think that it means that walls should be decreased down to 50 strength at Ancient and then 200 at Steel and sort of work their way back up like they did in Rise and Fall. Just because it means you're making walls stronger, you're limiting it to certain units to have with a certain other unit, so the ram. So it just makes it a very hard situation. You can still use siege units, but it takes a long time, and by the time you're done sort of sieging a city with a siege unit, sort of the benefit you would have gotten from going to war is not large enough to justify the ball. So I think maybe there'll be some changes in better balanced game in accordance with this whole shindig. We got medieval walls being immune in Renaissance to battering rams. So if someone pops out a medieval wall, no more rams. Just have to use siege units. And then siege towers are can't use them on Renaissance or Steel. So useless policy for stopping rock bands because it comes really late. You probably won't have the culture for it because of the increased civic costs and the decrease in the culture in books. Let's look at some UI. Basically, it's just a lot of stuff that's quality of life. But I mean, quality of life is always good. AI doesn't matter. Modding doesn't really matter. Nothing important here. We've got some bugs. We've got Royal Navy Dockyard applying the +1 naval unit movement bonus as an ability so that it carries through when it's upgrading. So this is something that you usually don't see on the English units now, but you will start to see it now that this has been sort of fixed up. And that's another buff to England. So England is definitely going to be a powerhouse naval civ. In addition to the fact that sort of its ability to have a strong infrastructure is increased as well. So England's on the up and up. One naval movement in the sea is huge because it means you can chase down fleeing navies and kill them off. And that's sort of how you win a naval battle. There's just a lot more bugs, nothing really important until you get all the way down here. So moon landing now no longer gives an excessive amount of domestic tourists. You used to be able to abuse this culture overflow glitch by going for civics that had low costs. The overflow culture would sort of balloon, and it would just create like a ton of domestic tourists, way more than was intended. And this sort of fixes this. So we might see sort of an increase in the culture you could get out of moon landing. It was decreased to sort of band-aid the problem, but might see 10 times culture back to moon landing. But so that's something we need to look out for. See how that pans out. But that's a really good change because that made culture victory really impossible in the late game, and the fact that that's fixed is great. There's nothing left. So I think overall there's some interesting things. We've got some new World Congress and diplomatic victory stuff to work with. We've got some interesting Pantheon stuff, and the fact that lumber mills are coming into play. I like in general a lot of the stuff on the patch, in theory. I think hopefully some of these stuff gets sort of altered or tinkered with in the Better Balanced Game mod, so that it just is a little bit more fair. Or some things that are never going to see play can maybe see a little bit more play. Maybe change some of these World Congress proposals to be a little bit earlier in the game. This one's later in the game, but spy operations are something that can see impact like in the mid game, and I think this would be a really cool one to see. Um, Same with like military advisory. I don't know when this comes into play, but the earlier the better, in my opinion. And to maybe just get rid of this one because like I don't even think this one's necessary. It's public relations. So if you like this kind of video and you want me to try and do more with patches like the Better Balanced Game updates or other Firaxis patches, let me know in the comments section or let me know um, in other ways. But thanks for watching such a long video. Bye.